Miniatures, dice, tiles, boards, pawns, and chips. You've held them, you've loved them, you've probably even thrown them. These are just a few pieces commonly used in tabletop games and RPGs. In recent years, board games especially have made a major comeback as people look for new ways to entertain themselves and their friends. Popular media, board game cafes, and a much-needed break from technology have all contributed to the return of the tabletop. And with this resurgence, experts have come to learn that checkers with your grandma is more than just a beloved pastime. Recreation, socialization, education, critical thinking, and improved mental health are just a few of the many benefits traditional games can bring you. The most obvious use for tabletop games is for recreational purposes. Recreation is something that all humans experience and enjoy from time to time. It allows us to relax and do things that we enjoy. Taking time to paint, read a book, and exercise are common examples of recreation, but for most people, taking the time to play our favorite board games with friends is their favorite recreational activity. Jane McGonigal is a game designer, and for the last 20 years, she's been researching games and how they can save the world. So far each week, the world spends 3 billion hours playing games. She's striving for everyone to play 21 billion hours of games each week. She believes that gamers are virtuosos at blissful productivity and the ability to weave a tight social fabric. This means that they have an incredible sense of urgency and can build these groups of people with the same urgency. This is why games as a recreation stand out. They have the opportunity to change the world. The way that RPGs and tabletop games can do just that is through all the skills people are gaining and improving when playing games. If the world can have multiple groups that are passionate about certain topics and they all have critical thinking skills, excellent socialization skills, and killer literacy skills, that group can handle anything that's thrown at them. The way we can get to that point is through playing games and building those exact skills. It's an easy way to relax and have fun as well, so board games are a great recreational activity. Most tabletop games require at least 2 people to play, so obviously games are a great way to interact with people and socialize. While you may have lost some friendships over games like Uno or Monopoly, board games are a common staple for family fun, bonding with friends, and even connecting strangers together in settings like the library, the park, and board game stores. Beyond just hanging out and socializing, games can contribute to the important process of socialization. Nguyen describes board games as a social catalyst or way to bring about new exchanges between people. There are 2 general categories of socialization that come out of playing games with people. The first is the bond created by playing the game and following its rules, and the second is created by the relationship of playing this game together in the real world. This first example is often broadened further by the creation of the house rule. House rules, or player-made rules that a group specifically chooses to play by, basically serves as a social contract among the friends and family playing the game. Playing games together creates unique experiences for the people involved that we can't really experience in other forms of socialization. If we look at tabletop RPGs like Dungeons & Dragons, we see very nuanced examples of this. Original D&D players were often labeled as social outcasts or people inept for society. Despite this, D&D has created a very large community network where people that may or may not be social outcasts can fit in. The game provides players with the need to work together as a team and cooperate. The person running the game typically enforces this aspect of teamwork and sets the framework for what is expected of each player. This makes it easier to learn teamwork and getting along with other people. It's a lot easier to let go of certain social rules when you're pretending to be a dwarf slaying a dragon and just having fun. For people that lack socialization, tabletop games have served as a gateway to being a part of a community. Tons of tabletops have similar vast communities that have become a great way to find a support group, social network, and even make friends. The stigma behind RPGs has faded in recent decades, and now tabletop games are simply for everyone. This has also led to games being used in schools, not just for socialization, but for education as well. In most people's minds, the word game is something that you would play in your free time after school or work. But for those in Lee High School in Vermont, that's not the case. Lee High School is a school that is for students who cannot function in a normal school setting because of an illness or a mental handicap. For these students, socialization doesn't come that easy to them. To help them with that, the administration allows them to play different forms of RPGs in school. The students' most favorite is Dungeons & Dragons. While playing D&D, these students are learning many different social skills, like cooperation, empathy, self-control, social self-awareness, and many more. Professionals call this social emotional learning, or SEL. SEL is a way of learning that puts emphasis on using emotions to manage situations for a positive outcome to the situation. The same skills students are learning with SEL as used in RPGs like Dungeons & Dragons. It allows these students to critically think, negotiate, and solve problems, which is something that if they went to a traditional high school setting, it would be very difficult to achieve. In their fantasy D&D game, the real-world bullies become dragons, which is much more attainable for them to mentally defeat. The same SEL method is used in therapy groups as well. D&D is a very helpful tool for those at Game to Grow, Take This, RPG Therapeutics, and Bodana Group. Taking a role of different characters allows players in these groups to overcome the hardships of life and give a new perspective on situations they're dealing with. Another big part of education is literacy. Literacy involves reading, writing, speaking, and listening, which are major components to RPGs like D&D. Stephanie L.B. Kaler, a graduate student from the University of Northern Iowa, researched the effects of RPGs on literacy skills in many different students. There are countless ways to play Dungeons & Dragons that affect the 4 different literacy skills. For example, reading would affect the Game Master more than the actual players of the game, because the Game Master sets up the setting and speaks for the NPCs. Listening and speaking would be more beneficial for all to keep the game moving and interesting. The only one that was different for each of the 7 people she researched was writing. There are pre-written D&D games that people can use for the campaigns. The groups that are actively writing their story as they go and have written their own have said that their writing skills have improved. For each person, there can be many benefits when playing RPGs. These games have shown that they are more than just a good time. D&D can provide many social skills and improve the literacy skills, and should be placed in school curriculum around the country so it can benefit many young minds. Board games have been increasingly implemented in classrooms across the country as they provide a more hands-on experience for students that need this type of learning. As the term gamification comes into more and more classrooms, students are developing critical thinking skills and strategy skills that they may not be able to obtain through other learning methods. Gamification of the classroom essentially means adding elements of games to lessons and situations that don't really involve games. This has been implemented in all levels of education, K through 12, some college programs, and even some job training. Some aspects of this include awarding points for meeting certain standards or completing assignments. This encourages competition within the classroom and pushes students to succeed. Some classrooms also grant rewards for reaching certain point levels as well. Unique approaches to lessons and learning paths encourage students to think critically and problem solve in ways that they wouldn't necessarily need to in regular lessons. The same can be said of many RPGs as well. Dungeons & Dragons often challenges players to come up with unique solutions to problems and make quick decisions for the sake of their party. Since most of D&D is made up on the spot, players have to be quick and creative if they wish to move on and win their game. If the Game Master tells a player they hear heavy footsteps approaching in a dirt cave, the player has the ability to make just about any decision they want. They could run, hide, fight, or even attempt to persuade the approaching creature that they're just another rock in the cave. The possibilities are basically endless, but require a unique level of decision-making. The decision-making process is unique to each player and has been used to the advantage of researchers in the field of psychology. Dr. W.D. Blackman is often cited as the first psychologist to use Dungeons & Dragons in their research. In his case report titled Dungeons & Dragons, the use of a fantasy game in the psychotherapeutic treatment of a young adult, he details his use of the RPG as a form of therapy for a patient called Fred. Fred could be described as an outcast with no real social connections, and initially, his participation in therapy was very limited and hesitant. However, after Fred joined a D&D group, he became able to discuss his own feelings and emotions first through the game and later on through his own emotions. His characters became projections, and he was able to work through his own thoughts and feelings and even his problems. Blackman's research has been further expanded and studied as fantasy becomes a more and more popular outlet for people. One study involving gifted children and adolescents used this form of play therapy to explore the self-extension of one's identity into their character and see how fantasy can be used to develop emotional regulation skills. In addition, plenty of studies have shown that tabletop games are a great way to relieve stress and increase happiness. So pick up a game and enjoy a much-needed escape from reality. The benefits listed are by no means a completed list of the endless value behind board games, but they're a pretty good reason to check out your local board game store. So the next time you're with a group of friends and aren't sure what to do, remember the rush of a great board game and let your imagination run wild.